I want to welcome you all to our 19th annual Wine Club Appreciation Soup event. It is our first and hopefully last virtual soup event. And for those of you that don't know who I am, I'm John Delmare. I'm a lucky proprietor here at Rappahannock Cellars, well known around the winery as Dad to a lot of my kids who you may know who are working here. This is our annual event where we get to say thank you to you all for your incredible friendship and patronage to Rappahannock Cellars, that you allow us to do what we do here. So this is a time that, for those of you who've been to our events before, that we get to serve you rounds of soup and serve you wine and make friendship in between and tell you what's gone on at the winery this year, maybe a little sneak peek into what's going on next year. Tom's going to talk to you about Vineyard. Theo's going to talk to you about the Cellar. We got the girls going to talk to you a little bit about the tasting room. Allan gets to talk about the Distillery, some of the efforts there, and the monumental hand sanitizer effort from our early COVID days. And so we're going to try to do all of that today. We just cannot be there eating your champagne soup maybe with you, enjoying hopefully this great Chardonnay that we sent out to you with your new glasses. A little token of thanks from us to you, and it's difficult for us to thank you properly for all that you allow us to do here. So, what happened at Rappahannock Cellars in 2020? We finished up 2019 terrifically, as you all know. We built our new building, our new tower. 2020 was off to a great start. March rolled around and COVID hit us like a ton of bricks. So we honestly didn't know how this winery would survive not having our tasting room open. And I guess we overlooked your incredible patronage and friendship and support for our winery, because we fretted about it, we cried about it, we sat back, we put our thinking caps on, and we opened up the shipping channels, and you all came to our rescue and stood in the gap for us. And honestly, I don't know how we would have made it without you. And because of you, we turned into a wine shipping machine here, and we shipped more wine than Kelly and Teresa were packing boxes all day long for those first couple of months of COVID. And finally, the governor allowed us to open back up again. And we were able to see many of your faces back out here, socially distanced, mostly outside, and kind of continuing that through the rest of this year. As I said, Tom's going to talk to you about what happened in the Vineyard. Theo will talk about what happened in the Cellar. But from a big picture standpoint, we just had the tiger by the tail in this COVID environment. And thank you for all you did to help us through that. So we have some pre-recorded sessions here, and then we do have live Q&A. Tom and Theo are here. We do have one question already, and that is if this will be available to see later. Yes, it will be posted on our website. It'll be recorded, and you'll be able to, if you have to leave or can't watch it now, you can come back and see it then. So in that regard, please, if you have questions, go ahead and post them. Don't wait for us to ask for them. There is a delay, as I mentioned, no, I didn't mention it because it was in my pre-recorded session, but there's about a 20-second delay from me saying something and you hearing it. So go ahead and type questions in, send them. We'll try to keep track of them, answer as many of them as we can. So we're going to get into it here. This next session is a pre-recorded segment from Tom out in the Vineyard, and then he'll be available for questions after that's played. Thank you.
Hi folks, my name's Tom Kelly. I'm the Vineyard Manager here at Rappahannock Cellars, and we're standing here with the Kenridge Vineyard, our Kenridge Vineyard behind us as our backdrop today for a brief discussion on how our 2020 vintage progressed this season. So, as is usually the case, we had a very challenging year this year. Started out with multiple frost events that challenged us, obviously, in trying to protect the vines from cold injury very early on. We're fortunate here at Rappahannock Cellars that we have several mechanical methods of mitigating that injury, from frost fans to things like a frost dragon, which is sort of a giant hair dryer on wheels that we pull behind the tractor. That goes up and down the rows and blows hot air all over the place. And so we had 5 separate frost events this spring, and so that was quite a number of very early morning 3 a.m. Calls to run into the office, run into the vineyard, our office here, and try to protect these vines. We did have some frost injury in certain parts of the vineyard. This particular vineyard, because of its situation on the hillside here, was pretty well protected from the cold, but our Glenway site and our Little Way site below us both had some varying degrees of injury. The worst hit block was probably our Seyval Blanc, which is at the very lowest point in all of our vineyards. Fortunately, that's a hybrid variety, which is very fruitful from secondary buds. So once the primaries are kind of frosted out and burned off by the frost, we get an emergence of secondary buds that turn into shoots. Those secondaries tend to be very fruitful. And so even though that block was completely wiped out, 95% injury to the primary buds, we still had a fantastic harvest off of that, a record-breaking harvest, in fact, at about 10 1/4 tons to the acre, which is an amazing yield for any grape variety, but even for hybrids. So all in all, while we lost a little bit of fruit, we lost a little bit of primary buds from the frost event. Overall, our yields actually turned up to be above average this year. We harvested a record 90 1/4 tons of fruit off of our 26 acres here. So you can do the math on that, and that turns out to be a pretty good yield considering the frost and the other big issue that we had this year, which was a hail event that occurred sort of early July, late June, early July time frame. Just happened to hit us at a really good point in the growing season for a hailstorm to happen. So we got pretty lucky with the timing of it, where the fruit had developed and it was pretty large and strong, but it was hard enough to resist a lot of the hail injury. Had that hail incidents occurred much later in the season, we would have had a lot of problems with rot, because the fruit would be much softer, it would be juicing out, and a lot of sugars coming out, and we'd have a lot of problems with rot and mildews growing on the fruit. Had it happened much earlier than that, it would have damaged a lot of the cluster and broken off parts of the clusters, and we would have had significant crop loss. As it was, we ended up with some cracked berries here and there, but generally the fruit was able to recover from that, and while some of our fruit wasn't the prettiest in the world, we got it ripe, and we still harvested it very clean, and we had minimal crop loss as a result of that hailstorm. So we were really blessed to have weathered that occurrence pretty well as well. So with all of that said, it was with all the challenges that we incurred this year, we had a very successful harvest here at Rappahannock. We're pretty pleased with the fruit that we got out of the vineyard this year. And I know that Theo will be telling you more about the wines that are being made from the fruit that we got this year. But we're very happy with the way things worked out. Every year is a new set of challenges. It seems like we sound like broken records when we're talking about this year being a challenging year. Almost every year is a challenging year. It's just a question of which challenges we're dealing with, and how we handle those challenges, which is going to measure whether we have had a successful year or an unsuccessful year. And of course, you all are the ultimate judge of our success or failure. So appreciate you all being here today. Enjoy the soups and the wines, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you. Okay. Hi, folks. We're back live. We're going to open things up for questions, and I'll try to give you answers. Do bear in mind there's a 20-second delay between what you are seeing and what I'm saying. So I I will just contrast a little bit what I said in my presentation about our vineyards and sort of build on that a little bit and explain what happened in our sister vineyard, which is the Indian Springs Vineyard, which is situated in Shenandoah County near Woodstock. That vineyard sits at a much higher elevation and so is a little less susceptible to frost injury. It's not so much the absolute elevation that helps us out there, but what we refer to as relative elevation. That is, the vineyard sits higher on higher ground relative to the ground that's surrounding it. So it has a natural frost protection where cold air can drain away from the vineyard site and down. Imagine cold air moving like water. It flows down. It's always going to seek out the lowest point. It's going to flow in rivers. If it hits an obstruction, it can pond back up. So when you can find a site where you can plant the vineyard up and away from those low spots, that's a sort of a passive approach towards frost control as opposed to the mechanical methods that we implement here. Indian Springs Vineyard had very little issues with frost this year, although they weren't completely untouched. There was a small block of Chardonnay that lost about 75% of its primaries due to the frost because it's situated, again, on a slightly lower site. It's a very undulating site, so there's low spots within the block itself for places where cold air can gather. So that sort of leads us to our, or maybe somewhat answers our first question, which is how did Chardonnay fare during the frost? So Chardonnay is an early breaking variety. It's usually one of the first varieties to break here, break bud. So it is very susceptible to frost injury. And our Chardonnay here on this site was touched by frost. There's a block of grapes that's the very first few rows closest to the winery, closest to our new building, that are some very young vines planted 2017, I think, Chardonnay. And that was pretty well wiped out by the frost because it sits at the lowest point. That area closest to the winery is the lowest point of that particular vineyard. And then way out towards the main road on 522, there's another block of Chardonnay. That Chardonnay was also touched by frost, but not so severely. We probably lost 50 or 60% of our primary buds out there. Switching back to Indian Springs for a moment, they've got two blocks of Chardonnay also, one up high. It's an older block. It's a large block. That was completely untouched by frost. And then the one I referred to earlier, which sits down a little lower, is a newer block, and that lost about 75% of the fruit in that block, or primary buds in that block. So, yeah, Chardonnay definitely heavily impacted by frost. Do we have another question?
We do. The next question is, what grape are you most excited about this harvest? Oh, I'm sorry, before you get to that, does harvesting grapes off of secondary buds affect the quality of the grapes produced?
It can affect the quality, yeah, in that those secondaries emerge later, and that means that they're going to ripen later. And given that we don't really know how much of a growing season we're going to have in terms of length, that can often translate into underripe fruit if our growing season ends early. It may force us to have to hang fruit longer, which is actually the case this year. We had a pretty short growing season. Things got very cool very early at the end of the season. And so we had to really leave the fruit out there a much longer period of time than we might have in, say, a year like 2019, where it was very warm season. We had to leave things out a lot longer to get them fully ripened. And that's even more challenging for fruit that's coming off of secondary buds that is kind of set back or set behind anyway. So we had really a double challenge with the frost in that we had the late emergence of those buds, late developing fruit, and then a very early cool season and a short growing season. So, and then I think there was another question about which grape are we the most excited about here? It's hard for me to say. I mean, that's really maybe a question more for Theo. because he's the one who has to take that fruit and make it into what it's going to be is wine. You know, I got excited about the Seyval Blanc this year because because it was such a heavy producer, and that to me that's great. I love to see vines just throwing out lots and lots and lots of fruit, especially when it's very good fruit. And it goes into a really fun wine program for us, which is our Blanc de Blanc program. So I'd say that's probably the one that's the most exciting to me. Lots of really high quality fruit and a really fun wine made from that. So any other questions? Okay, so the other questions that we have here, I think we're going to defer to let Theo answer. They're probably more wine-oriented, wine quality-oriented, fruit quality-oriented. So I guess that's it for me. Thanks for showing up. Enjoy the soup, enjoy the wine, and see you soon. Bye.
Hello there. Welcome to Rappahannock Cellar. This is our first time doing a soup event speech from the actual fermentation room. So this is great to have you all here for the first time. Or many of you for the first time. What a unique and interesting year this has been. We have had COVID shutdowns and navigating that whole rigmarole. We've had increasing severity of weather events, and then to boot the largest harvest that we've ever had in Rappahannock Cellar's history. So this has been one for the record books for sure. Despite 5 frost events post-bud break, plus a hailstorm at bloom time, and spotted winged Drosophila, African fig fly, the spotted lanternfly now. We have the African murder hornet as well on the west coast, plus bears and COVID. We can stand here now and say, my God, we've made it through it. Well, we made it this far. There's still a little bit left in the year. But at least we've made it this far. We made it through harvest, which I would say right now is about 90% of the goal. So there's a lot going on in the cellar right now. We've just finished picking about 315 tons of fruit. We have about 55,000 gallons of newly fermented wine, or wine juice that's just finishing up fermentation right now. On top of that, we start our 2019 bottling of our kind of latter season reds. So we have our 2019 Meritage, our Black Label Meritage Cab Franc, the New World Red, and the Petit Verdot that are all going to get bottled over the next several months, which is pretty exciting. These 2019 wines are so impressive right now. It was an incredible vintage, and you would expect incredible wines this time of year, but their length, their structure, their tannin, their volume, their density, these are all factors that are going to serve these wines and allow them to age for many, many years to come. So that's pretty exciting to be able to, kind of the last step is just putting them into bottle, and then hopefully that's it, and they can age, and this kind of, you kind of wash your hands of that, and it's on to the next stage there. So we have that stage of things, then our 2020 stage of things, which has come back and surprised us immensely. Initially, with all the weather events early on in the year, the frost, the hailstorm, we were a little skeptical and nervous about how the later season reds and whites would be affected by that. So we ended up being about 2 weeks behind entirely. Overall, a week and a half to 2 weeks behind on the vintage throughout the entire season. So we started picking on August 26th with Seyval, and we finished picking on October 28th with Vidal. And those 2 months are they're quite busy, but they were spread out. Mother Nature really cooperated with us. There's a fair amount of rain. We did a couple of 3 to 4 inch rain storms during the growing season that were a little nerve-wracking. But still, despite all of that, towards the end of the year, it dried out. Hurricane season was quite manageable, and we were able to bring everything in when it was optimally ripe. And the wines right now in the cellar are incredible, and they're very pleasing. There's a lot of finesse, a lot of elegance, exactly what you want to see this time of year, for sure. Every year, we try to improve our cellar practices and our winemaking styles. This year, we played around a lot with skin maceration time to improve rosé color and aroma and flavor. We also really push the envelope with our white juices and bringing them in, and we've started this technique of stirring them on the heavy solids for several days. Typically, when you bring in white fruit, you'll press it, collect the juice in a tank, let it settle, and then out of it over 24 hours, there's this mass of solids that will settle out. And after that settles, you will move the juice off of that into another fermentation vessel and then ferment it. What we started doing now is, after we press the juice and bring it into a tank, rather than let it settle, we'll actually stir it through. We'll put a propeller essentially through this port and stir the tank. We'll drop the temperature down to about 40 degrees, and then also add a bunch of nitrogen gas to it to inhibit any sort of fermentation. But then stir it from anywhere from 3 to 7 days. And what that does is essentially supercharges the juice with a ton of aromatic and flavor precursors that eventually get released during fermentation. And you end up with these wines that are almost nauseatingly aromatic and voluminous beyond belief. But those are actually two good problems to have for white wine. So we really enjoy those trials and playing around with new techniques and juice treatments, regimens. On the red winemaking side, we are always playing around with, actually it's a lot of what we enjoy is tank geometry and how that affects the fermentation kinetics, the extraction rates, and then also the overall wine quality. So you can see here we have a short and fat tank, and we have a very tall and narrow tank. During fermentation, the yeast produce ethanol and CO2, and they generate so much carbon dioxide, they push the mass of skins and seeds up to the top of the fermentation, and they're just sitting there at the top. And if you have a very short and fat tank, there's still a fair amount of surface area in contact with the fermenting juice. However, if you have a very tall and narrow tank, you have a much more limited surface area that's in contact with the fermenting wine and juice. So you have to do more pump overs. You have to incorporate it more here versus you have to a little less work here. So we play around with what's the most efficient thing for our cellar? How do we make this? How do we make it best for the wine? Always, what's best for the wine? But these are some different techniques that we use. Obviously, if you think about our cellar space, we have some areas that are open right up to the top. We like to be efficient and use those all the way up, versus some areas that are under ceilings that we have less space, and those turn into kind of shorter and fatter tanks. So it really comes down to logistics and managing your cellar space as efficiently as you possibly can. We've also spent years with red wine trials of yeast and cooperage barrel manufacturers with specific wine styles and varietals. And now I think we're finally starting to see the fruition of dialing in which yeast to use, which varietal, and then which cooperage, which barrel to put it in subsequently. And those are very long, timely, and costly trials. But now we're seeing, especially in our 2019 reds, this intense focus of oak integration with tannin, with fruit, and it's really pleasing to see all this kind of come into fruition, as they say. I guess in closing, everyone, or a lot of people every year ask me what to look forward to from this vintage, from the current vintage. And every year my answer varies a little bit. However, I think now I can finally say with certainty that there's always one thing to look forward to from every vintage. It's more delicious wine. I say that because when I started in 2011, our annual production was 100 tons of fruit. And now, 2020, we're at over 300 tons of fruit. And we're not showing any signs of slowing down. And that is vastly attributed to you all and your enthusiasm for our wine. So we would like to encourage you to keep encouraging us to make more wine. Thank you very much for your support, as always, and take care. Happy holidays. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today on the Saturday afternoon for our virtual soup event. It's very odd being here and not having all of you in front of us, but it's nice knowing that you're still there in one capacity or another. So thank you for joining us again. I'm going to pick up where Tom left off, and I'm going to answer a bunch of questions right now, but we will pick up at the end and address any questions that are pertaining to either the vineyard or the cellar or the distillery. Anything we missed during our segment, we'll come back and answer later on. So I think Tom answered for his favorite grape that came in this year was Save All. I would actually agree with him that it's just shocking to see something. This block, when it got hit by frost, was completely wiped out. I think I actually texted John and said, I've never seen something look more dead in my life. And then it was just brown. I see they had these little green shoots that had leaves out, and then the next day, after the frost event, they were all brown and wilted, the entire block. And then it still came back, pushed secondaries, and still put out over 10 tons to the acre. It was pretty shocking, and it made an incredible wine. The other varietal that I would say we're very excited about is Petit Verdot. It's just incredible. For so many years, we struggled to get high quality Petit Verdot in. And if we could, it would be a ton or 2 tons. Now to have 12, 14, 16 tons of fruit coming off of this incredible Petit Verdot. We came in, once we picked the fruit, we put it into a refrigerated trailer to keep it cold before it comes here, and it gets quite cold. So this PV this year came in, it was actually about 40 degrees by the time we started processing it. And we destem it, so separate the stems, we sort it, and so we have this mass of kind of whole berries, like slightly broken berries. And it sat in tank and it just cold soaked. Sometimes people, if you're really quick to get a fermentation going, you can heat the tank up and really push it. This year, the fruit was so ripe and so lovely that we decided we're just going to be very minimal in our intervention. We're not going to heat it up. We're just going to let it sit there in tank, cold soak it, do its thing. You get this kind of initial kind of fermentation going on from indigenous microbes that come in on the fruit. And then once it warms up to about 55, 56, then we're at our yeast that we want to kind of finish the fermentation. And it all said and done, this Petit Verdot spent about 4 weeks in tank, which is it's a good chunk of time for red wine. But it's what it needed and it's what it got. And it was pretty nice to see things come to fruition like that when you get the opportunity to. We had another question earlier about how the frost impacted Chardonnay, and do you ferment in stainless versus barrel, depending on what happens. That's for our wine style here, typically things that are higher in acid, that are more austere, little less fruit driven, and more palate and structure driven. We'll put those in stainless because we'll try to retain the subtle aromatics, delicate aromatics, and we'll try to retain and kind of preserve it as is. Versus fruit that's a little bit riper, we'll have a tendency to ferment it maybe just a little bit warmer. We'll let it go into barrel. We'll get some meat on it. We'll encourage that weight and the richness that would come from fruit that's a little bit riper. So in the event of a frost and something gets hit, then you have fruit that's a little bit behind. So we were seeing in our blocks of Chardonnay that were hit by frost that they were about anywhere from 10 days to 2 weeks behind. And that would lead to increased acidity and lent itself more to stainless steel fermentations. So if you remember our 2019 Vintner Select, it's a black label Chardonnay that went out a few months ago. That was entirely stainless steel, but that was not from frost-affected fruit. However, we're doing the same style of wine. However, we took fruit that was a little bit further behind and higher in acid, and put that to the program, and still made quite a similar wine. Questions? Oh yeah, Norton too. I've never said this before, but I'm excited about Norton. And the reason I'm saying this is because we had a lot of it come in, and we are able to kind of pick and choose what goes to port and what goes to a still wine. We actually had some of the most incredible Norton I've ever seen come into the cellar, and I tasted it. It was probably about 3 weeks ago with the owner of the vineyard. It's a small little vineyard in Front Royal. It's called Chapel View, and it's only about four years old now, the Norton, 5 years. And it came in, and I was tasting it with the owner, and it was so far better than I ever expect Norton to be at this stage. Normally, Norton, for like 2 years, Norton is just unapproachable. It's acidic and tannic, and it's going in a million different places. It takes a long time for that wine to settle down. But then trying it, it was so beautifully balanced. It still hadn't been in oak. It was still sitting in tank. Structured. For the first time, I actually ever got excited about Norton. That probably won't happen again, but we'll see. Will there be more Norton next year? Yes, there's going to be more Norton still wine for sure, especially if these vineyards keep producing the way they have been. We'll have a lot of Norton. It can be a fairly high cropping varietal, so there should be a lot of it, but birds do like it. A lot of other animals like it. So there's a lot of competition for it as well between wineries and animals. How do I compare the last 3 years of wine? All right, great question. So 2020, 2020 was just a very surprising year altogether. It was odd. You didn't know what to expect the entire time, but then in the end it came out and really impressed us. 2019 was just incredible. It was actually the type of year where you could see it coming the entire time of how great it was. You could see the potential energy there, all the potential of the fruit, and you were just praying hard that something catastrophic was not going to happen up until the point where you had to pick it, and nothing did. I mean, 2019 was through and through an incredible vintage. And then 2018 was actually a vintage where you were just kind of the entire year, you're like, all right, what's next? Here it comes, another rain event, something else happened, animal pressure, some odd invasive species from China comes. It was just everything you could have been thrown at you was thrown at you in 2018, and it was one of those ones where you dig in your heels and you just kind of tell yourself, we're not going to be beat. We will do whatever we can, whatever is in the realm of possibility to get the best fruit. And so that just 2018 turned into an incredibly long and hard vintage to work because of the amount of time and energy that it took to get things to be where they needed to be. 2019 seemed like a cakewalk. 2020, this year, actually, despite having processed the most amount of fruit we've ever processed, this year actually seemed relatively easy in comparison to other vintages we've had. Hi, Kathy. How you doing? Yes, there's always something new in sparkling wine. I'm getting the itch, and one of the things I've learned about winemaking is so much patience involved. I thought that having a wife and kids and a family would teach me patience, but it's been the winemaking side of things that's taught me, and growing has taught me a lot of patience. So, tasting, we in 2018 made a Chenin Blanc. The Chenin came from a vineyard about 4 miles away from us in Linden. And it was beautiful, and all I've ever wanted to do is make a Chenin Blanc sparkling wine. So we did, and we actually put it into magnums, so big bottles, 1.5 liters versus 750 or 750 milliliters, and just babying it along, letting it do its thing. We tasted it about a year ago now, and it was so exciting to see something heading in all the right directions. So the Chenin, unfortunately, still is about a year out. That would probably be December of 2021 that we will be getting that available and out to you all. But it's going to be a very unique, special package, just a one-of-a-kind wine. And that kind of, in 2018, we also 2017, we planted Chenin back at Kenridge. And next year, we should get our first lot of Chenin off of that block and turn into, God willing, turn into sparkling wine. But, yes. Oh, wine is good. How's the rugby team? Well, the rugby team was on hiatus or sabbatical this year because of every other team in our conference and on the Eastern Seaboard, pretty much in North America, not having any games. So we did a lot of inter-squad scrimmages, alumni scrimmages, and then we got one game against a men's club that just walloped us. So from a pride standpoint, the team is a little hurting this year. But they came out, they picked Norton out at Chapel View Vineyard across from the college. They actually did a bunch of canvassing for some I just put them to work in the most random jobs. They canvassed for political, for town council people. They picked grapes. They did a bunch of landscaping. It was kind of a fundraising season, I guess you could say, for them. They worked hard, but it was more about kind of getting money into the coffers to spend next year when we do have a season. But they're all doing well. It's actually a really good squad this year.
Next one is, are you playing with different methods with petit verdot using stainless versus barrels?
So we're playing with different methods with petit verdot. So with PV, we are playing with extraction. The PV, it's such a small berry that it's really easy to over extract it. You've heard me talk about the high skin to juice ratio. It's really easy to overdo it. So one thing that we played around, again, I was talking earlier about this cold soak, this long, slow, cool fermentation, rather than this quick, hot fermentation. You get higher heat in fermentations, you get a lot more extraction, but you can get very burnt, kind of coarse flavors. So we do try to temper what can be this monster of a grape of Petit Verdot. So we play with temperature, we play with number of pump overs, the tank geometry question. You can get less extraction. You can help mitigate a really high tannic grape with a little bit of a more narrow tank versus a short and fat tank. So yes, we are constantly trying to improve our Petit Verdot game, and that is because we have so much of it. Next year, I would really like to. We have some old puncheons. Puncheons are these big 500-liter barrels. They're more than twice the size of these guys, and they've gotten to the point where they're not really. They're helping to hold wine. They're still a watertight storage vessel, but they'd be a lot better if we knocked the head off. And you just knock the head off and then kind of reshave it down and re-toast it, and then flip it on its head and ferment in it. So I'd like to. We have about 8 puncheons that I would like to knock the head off of and try fermenting Petit Verdot in wood next year, because we always ferment it in stainless. I'd really like to get some into oak to ferment. So that would be something to look forward to for next year.
Okay, go ahead and tell them. We've got a lot of really great
Okay.
questions. We're going to move on. We're going to answer them at the end.
We have a lot of really great questions, and I guess I'm running out of time here, but we will answer your questions at the end. So please stay tuned, and we'll make sure to follow up with all of them. So thank you again, everybody. Have a great afternoon. Cheers.
Is it still going? Oh, okay, sorry. Oh. Hello, I am Kelly, and this is my sister Teresa, and our flightologist, Sheritage, and we are team tasting room at Rappahannock Cellars. Happy Soup Event Day. We have missed seeing so many of your familiar faces around the winery this year, but like everyone, COVID-19 has brought about a lot of changes and a lot of differences here at the winery. Probably our most fun and different thing that we're doing is our test tube flight. We pour these test tube flights every day of the week, and it allows you to come out to the winery, enjoy the atmosphere, the wine, see some of us, even though we're all wearing masks, when you're here, but it allows you to come in and still maintain social distancing.
For those of you who are unable to come in due to the COVID pandemic, we are able to deliver your wine curbside, or you can take advantage of our free shipping on 30 bottles or more for your holiday needs.
Many, many thanks for all your support and love. We miss you all. Please come by and I'll pour you a flight. We got a lot of Sheritage here. Happy holidays. Hope to see you soon.
Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Wow. Cheers.
Come on, Cher.
So why is it that the most outgoing, vivacious, big personalities in the winery get so serious and businesslike behind the camera there? Those girls. They are all upstairs working today, so otherwise they would join us down here in the event. But they are busy serving and pouring and selling wine. We did have one question. I'm sorry, Kelly, I forgot the question. There was one about whether this is going to be available. Oh, I know what it was. A lot of people have been emailing in on wondering how the governor's new order affects us. And it doesn't affect us very much. People have been asking, are you still open? Well, yes, we are still open. We are still social distancing indoors. We have the same limitations upon us as we did before. The new order from the governor just simply limited individual group sizes. So if you pull up here in a bus with 50 of your favorite friends, you're violating the 25-person limit. We couldn't have weddings. We couldn't have winemaker dinners. We couldn't do special gatherings, special events such as that. But it doesn't affect our day-to-day business any more than it did before. So just to let you all know that. And I think we're going to move on next to Allan. Going to talk to you a little bit about the distillery and what he's been up to this year. So.
Hello to everyone and welcome to our virtual soup event. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Allan Delmare. I'm the distiller at Distillery. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit about what's been going on in 2020, although not too much. I'm sure we'd all like to leave most of it behind. And tell you a little bit about what's coming up in the future here. To begin with, thank you so much for all of your generosity. When COVID struck and we had to shut down the stills and we pivoted to making hand sanitizer it is your generosity that really saw us through it. Really kept us going, allowed us to do the sanitizer, kept us productive, and we were able to produce and donate 2,000 or so gallons. That's at the time about $100,000 worth of hand sanitizer. One of the interesting things that came about from that is Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull, the band, for those of you who are familiar. He got wind of what we're doing and gave us his image and likeness and signature to put on bottles. And so we've been producing the Jethro Tull hand sanitizer, the only officially sanctioned one. It is for sale and available online. You can get it at helpingtheheroes.com/store. We'll add a link to that. But he's not, he said, look, just sell this stuff and donate all the proceeds to the charity. So the funds go to wounded veterans through the Helping the Heroes Foundation. Okay, so no more sanitizer discussion, I promise. I'll tell you a little bit about what we've been doing when we shut down our stills in March or so. Of course, our barrels continued to age. Our barrel rested gin actually aged much longer than I anticipated aging it, and it came out to be this incredible, delightful surprise. So if you haven't tried our barrel-aged gin recently, do give that a shot. It was about 10 months in American toasted oak barrels. It's just a really fun, interesting, unique gin. We were able to, fortunately, restart our stills and get back in the saddle. I think it was June, maybe July-ish. And actually right now I have 1,100 gallons of Vidal Blanc that just finished fermenting. As Theo told you, we had a really big harvest this year, so I've got some goodies for the stills here, and I can't wait to get started on that. So, yep, firing up the stills, distilling fresh wine from the harvest, and very happy to be resuming that. A couple of accomplishments that we've had this year is our cinnamon vodka. That was something that we were in trial stages and phases of. We were able to scale that up and really find a way to successfully produce it. So we've got our cinnamon vodka really, I think, perfected and locked in. That's something that we're going to have continuously going forward. Another great accomplishment was just actually this week we received notice that our brandy had received a 95-point score and gold medal from the USA Spirit Ratings competition based out of San Francisco. That was pretty exciting. For those of you who aren't familiar, our brandy is aged in new charred American oak barrels, which is the same barrel type that you use for making bourbon. So it's got a lot of those kind of bourbon-y characteristics to it. Something that we're doing going forward is that we're going to be aging that in the charred oak like we have been, but then transferring it to our port barrels. Now, some of you may remember we did do a limited release of a tawny barrel finished brandy. We're going to really expand that, and I think the vast majority of our brandy will probably go into that, a little bit of a kind of signature production for us, I think. I really, really like the complexity and depth and color and aromas that you get from the brandy sitting in those port barrels, especially after it's been holding port for years and years. So that's something that we're really going to be focusing on going forward. We are going to continue some of our other projects that we've been talking about for years now, one of them being vermouth, of course. I've teased and hinted at habanero vodka and cucumber vodka and a couple of other experiments like that. Unfortunately, those are going to get pushed off as a necessity from the craziness of this year. So those will be 2021 announcements. Two accomplishments that I really want to, kind of same vein that I really want to mention is this year during the pandemic and the heat of the crisis, we got the ability to ship spirits directly to your home. So we've always been able to do that with wine. This year we got the ability to do it with spirits. Now that's just to Virginia. Previously we could do it, we could ship spirits to residences and offices in DC. This year now that expands to Virginia as well. On top of that, we have connected with a liquor shop in DC, and they are going to be able to ship our spirits for us to, I think, every state but 4 in the country. We should, in time for the holidays, have the ability to send our spirits nationwide. So that's a big movement for us. And before I let you go, one last thing I want to mention is that I've been toying with, I've hinted and dropped to my dad a couple of times that we should install a golf course. Oh, too much money, too much land, blah, 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 blah. So my idea is a virtual driving range, you know, with like 4K projectors and screens and separate hitting bays and all that. Anyhow, I think it's a cool idea. You get this virtual driving range, you play around a golf in like an hour. You have club member leaderboards, virtual charity events. Most of you probably want me to stop talking about it. I understand you're probably in the silent majority, emphasis on silent though. For the rest of you who like the idea, if we pester my dad enough, I think we can make this happen. So start bugging him saying, what a great idea, right? I mean, it's like virtual Topgolf, but with like your favorite booze. So, okay, I'm done. I'll be, either myself or my dad will be here for some Q&A immediately following this. But again, thank you to all of you, and look forward to 2021. Cheers. All right, everybody. Let me get on camera. Hello, hello, hello. Thanks again for joining us here today. The baby has not been born yet, so I am here live and in the flesh. We've got a couple of questions. I think the first one, Kelly, was that the vermouth question? Thank you. Yeah, we are going to be producing that vermouth. That is going to be that 2021 project. I did a couple of test batches. We used it in the distillery and loved it. And vermouth is just not something that most people drink or even like. It's real simple though. You basically make a port and add botanicals, like the same kind of botanicals that you would find in gin. And there's sweet vermouth, which is usually red, and dry vermouth, which is usually looks like a white wine. So we can make that here, and it's delicious. I've had people say, "Oh, I don't have no vermouth," like Winston Churchill, like, you know, keep it across the room. And when they've tasted it, they have absolutely loved it, even straight and neat. So yes, we will be doing vermouth. Great question. Thank you for that. And when will my gin be back in stock? Asking for a friend. I'm probably about 3 weeks away, maybe 4, from getting that gin back in stock. Our vodka started flying off the shelf, and actually great. I think folks have been asking for it at the ABC store, which helps move it through those stores, and once it's on the shelf, it kind of gains its own traction. So my last bottling was vodka, and I've replenished those supplies. Next will be the next release of the London Dry Style gin. Of course, we have the barrel finished gin on the shelf right now. So, great question. Thank you. The next question is, how are tastings working with the whole COVID thing in the distillery? Well, we have to reduce our capacity, of course, and although the distillery tasting room is pretty small as it is, that means it's much, much smaller. So we've got a couple of kind of bar top tables, socially distanced and spread around the room, and that's basically, people, you can't go up to the bar just like in the wine side. So once those tables are full, that's our max reduced capacity. But we do offer tastings still. So what we'll do is we'll put a placemat down on your table, and you can select the spirits that you want to taste, and then we'll drop those in little glasses, nosing glasses on the placemat for you. And of course, we are still also able to provide cocktails as well. But we kind of set it on the table and then step away and interact with you from across the bar. So. Yeah, great question. The first, well, the next bottling of the Tawny barrel finished brandy, I'm going to say probably depends on how much you buy up what's in the what's released right now. Empty another barrel, but I'm going to be moving some of the brandy barrels into the Tawny barrel, and I want to give that at least 3 months. So I'd say 3 to 6 months is probably the timeline for the first release of that. Next question is unaged brandy. Are we planning on making that and selling it again? Yeah, actually, so far all the brandy that I've not been putting into barrel has been going into our port wines, and like once we use as much as we need, I'm always out. But we've got some Vidal grapes, like I mentioned. We've got about 1,500 gallons actually, as I just found out, to distill, and I'm excited to use some of that to just make a small bottling of just the unaged clear kind of eau de vie style brandy. So, are we using our brandy for the pour? Absolutely, yeah. So The brandy that we put into the port doesn't get barrel aged. You want to preserve the fresh, really, really intense aromatics of it, and not that, you know, the port, especially the tawny style, is aging in barrel, so it's already getting a lot of the barrel influence there. So yes, we use our brandy, but we use the eau de vie style, that Vintner Select as we called it, and it just goes straight into the port. Yeah. Gin in time for Christmas. I'm not making promises, but let's go with this. Maybe, hopefully. So the question is, since we're using grapes, are we going to make a grappa? Great question. Grappa is, of course, a type of brandy. It's more generally called, you know, your grappa is typically going to be an Italian product, but it's more generally referring to a pumice brandy, which is, instead of making brandy from the wine itself, so distilling the wine, that would produce what you would just call a brandy for the most part. The pumice brandy is, once the skins have been pressed off the juice, the fermented skins, normally you might compost them and toss them, but there's actually a tiny, tiny little bit of alcohol in them. And if you cook those up, you can actually collect that alcohol. So it's alcohol just from the pumice or the skins of the grape, and that would be a grappa. Are we going to do it? I've tried it. It is not easy to do. You really have to be very intentional about it. You can't let the skins sit around. You have to store them in a CO2-rich environment so that they don't oxidize. And you need a lot of them, like a lot. Big grappa houses have like grain silos filled with this stuff. And I've got 100 gallons still. So it's not very feasible to produce grappa at scale. I will, when I get a chance, not this year, hopefully maybe next year, if we can get on top of it during harvest to get a small batch going and maybe a very limited small release. But I wouldn't say not until next year for sure. Any plans on cocktail kits? Great question. I just did a live streaming event for the Washingtonian Whiskey and Fine Spirits Festival, and we had Colleen from the Wild Roots Apothecary in Sperryville come up, and she's an herbalist, and she's got all these really cool tinctures and extracts and stuff, and we were just talking last week about putting together a cocktail kit, particularly using her stuff, but no reason why we couldn't get creative with what we've got right now. So great question. Yes, I think that's an awesome idea. We'd love to do that. Kelly, I'm going to put Kelly in charge of that. Can you make reservations for a tasting? Another good question. We don't have a reservation system set up right now. It hasn't been a problem. We haven't seen a queue or people standing in line waiting to get into the door. Usually as people kind of come in and come out, you know, they might go get a wine tasting while they wait for some spots to open up in the distillery. If we start to run into that, we will definitely deploy a reservation system. But for the most part right now, it hasn't been necessary. It's just, you know, come on in and we'll so far been able to just get you a seat. Do I have anything available? Oh, and 375 bottles. Another good question. Yes and no. I do have some 375s bottled right now. I need to bottle more. And what we do is we do a 3-pack and a 4-pack gift pack, and you could choose any 3, mix and match, or choose any 4. So there's, I think we're down to 2. I think there's barreled gin and there might even be actually some regular gin 375s left, but I need to bottle the others so we can complete the packs. But yes, we will make sure to have that in time for the holidays. Lots of comments about golf. Okay, I'm being told that I love the golf comments. So yeah, I'm being told that I'm going to be allowed to answer those, but at the end. So thank you for all your great questions. I'm going to hop over here, and I think we're going to move over to my dad to take over here. Give me 1 second.
Okay, we're back. Yes, Allan? We're back. Good. What is Rappahannock Cellars going to do in 2021? Our crystal ball is very, very cloudy. COVID, of course, has clouded up that ball. As we mentioned earlier, there are many things that we can't do. We can't do events. We can't do soup events. We can't do dinners and wine and food pairings. So our things that we can do are much more limited, but of course we are continuing our test tube flight tastings. As long as we can, we'll be doing tastings and sales in the winery. continuing until this COVID mess is over, are free shipping on your cases. We are doing curbside pickup for those who are not quite comfortable, either in a hurry or maybe not quite comfortable mixing with other folks, especially indoors as our outdoor areas become less available during the cold weather. So I guess that's a good way of saying, not really sure what's going to happen next year. But we're going to continue doing what we're doing, and we hope that you will continue to come join us here. And we have a lot of indoor spaces. We're going to be opening back up part of this barrel room. As you can see what we've done here, maybe you can't quite tell, but we've split the room in half with this stack of port barrels. And so the front half of this room, as the weather gets colder, we will allow tastings here also to increase our indoor space so we can house as many people as possible, but at the same time keeping everybody socially distanced and safe. So that's what we're going to try to make good with, and continue doing what we're doing. It's a beautiful day today. You know, the weather has treated us very well on the weekends, and we know it's going to get cold and it's going to turn into an indoor environment as we move forward here, but we'll put that off as long as we can. So that is as much as we can tell you about the year to come. I think from a production standpoint, you know, Theo talked about wanting to crush 400 tons here. We do continue to grow as you continue to buy a lot of our wine. We do have a lot of inventories that we need to build, and so our production will be climbing this coming year. Tom's going to be replanting certain portions of our vineyard. We have an old Viognier block that wasn't producing very well that is going to be replanted to Céval. Céval, as you may know, on top of us making a still wine with it, it is our primary grape in our Charmat style Blanc de Blanc. We love it there. It makes a delicious sparkling wine. So we're going to plant a little more of that. We're going to plant a little more. We have an old section of the vineyard that's a little bit of a low spot, about a half an acre, that's never been able to grow anything very well. So we're going to put a little Chambourcin in there, which will be a lot hardier in that low spot. And as many of you have found, Chambourcin has made its way into a lot of our rosés, and it makes a delicious rosé. So we're planting a little more of that, as we don't have very much of it at this point. And in the meantime, we've got new Chardonnay block coming on. Talked about our new Chenin Blanc block coming on, so we're looking forward to some of those new grapes in the coming year. So that's about as much as I can tell you about 2021. And I guess we always end this presentation the same way that we started, and that's with an incredible thank you to you all. Again, your friendship, your patronage to our winery allows us to follow our passion. All of us, this is our passion, and it's our livelihoods, it's our daily drudgery that we love, and you allow us to keep doing that, and that's why we take at least one day a year where we can sit back and pour our heart out a little bit and tell you how much we love you and that we thank you for your friendship and patronage. So, thank you. Thanks for being with us. I think we had some unanswered questions, so what we're going to try... Okay, a few for me that I can answer with the mic on. Okay.
How did your family leave in California fare?
Good question. So my wife's brother, who has a vineyard that we get some Cabernet Sauvignon from every year that goes into our New World Red blend of our East-West Coast. That vineyard is in Lake County. Lake County, California is the county. When you leave Napa County on the north, you cross over into Lake County. Fortunately, this year it was far enough north, it wasn't anywhere near any of the fires. They did have fires in 2017 and 2018. They were very lucky. One fire came within a quarter mile of them, but the winds were blowing the other way, and there was no smoke taint issues. So their vineyards fared very well. Unfortunately, we have some family who lost their home. We had other family members who were evacuated. The fires were pretty widespread, and as you know from the news, affected hundreds of thousands of people. So thank you for that question and that concern. Okay, so we have 3 questions in one here, all more or less related to climate change. Rain during this summer. Is climate change helping us? And are we going to be growing anything different as a result of climate change? Good questions. I just gave an interview the other day with a reporter who's doing an article on climate change in our area, how it affects growers and amongst many growers, not just grape growers. I think the takeaway with climate change for us as grape growers here is that, I've said from the beginning, after growing grapes in California and coming here, the biggest difference between Virginia growing environment and California is the fact that every year is different here. One year we can have a dry, warm year like California. One year we can have a cool, cloudy year. It can be vastly different. The grapes are different every season. And as grape growers, you have to be on your toes to deal with all of this myriad of things that can come at you. As a winemaker, you have to be able to assess fruit during the growing season and as it's coming into the winery and decide what techniques and what style winemaking techniques are best used on these grapes, because our Cabernet Franc this year from this vineyard may be completely different than the Cabernet Franc last year from the same vineyard. So it always keeps us on our toes, and things are always different. So climate change. I can't tell you that there is a trend that I can point to and say, oh, it's getting warmer, oh, it's getting colder. We just know it is different and it is more erratic, and we have lost the sense of what's normal. So if you had asked me 10 years ago what's normal in Virginia, we could have said, oh, well, normally bud break is in the first week to 10 days of April. We have bloom in early June, and we start harvesting our white grapes in, let's call Chardonnay, about the third week of September. Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon and Norton all come in October, and we're done by the end of October. Well, 2018, 2019 came along. We had bud break at the end of March, a good 2 weeks earlier than, quote, normal. We had the two earliest harvests on record. We started in the first 10 days of August, I think, both of those years. We've had hail, which we've had now 2 years of meaningful hail that we had never really seen before. We had this year our first significant frost events. Not that we hadn't seen little pieces of frost or that we hadn't been on our knees a lot because we were almost frosted all these past years, but finally it got us this year. We've invested more heavily in frost mitigation equipment that Tom talked a little bit about. And so it just, again, every year is different. And climate change, it just throws a little more uncertainty into the works. Most of it is not things that we haven't seen before for the most part. We're just probably seeing it more often now. How does that affect what we grow? Well, part of it is climate, part of it is just learning our site. So what have we learned about our site here at Rappahannock Cellars? We have a good grape growing site here. Our sister vineyard in Shenandoah County is a great grape growing site. So we are focusing more here on this site, planting hardier varietals that are a little more resistant to the weather, the differential weather patterns that come in, mostly grapes that we can harvest a little earlier. And we let our late season grapes and reds and Petit Verdot and Cab Franc on our sister vineyard, we've expanded those there. So we are not necessarily growing different things. We have a little bigger focus now on Saval, but that's mostly a choice to get into the sparkling wine end of things. But it does grow really well on this site, and it's very hardy, as you heard earlier. To be completely frosted off and then have a record harvest off of the vines was really phenomenal. So I would just say it just keeps our attention. The weather is always something we deal with in Virginia, and I think we are safe to say we're never going to see a season again where there isn't something unusual that happens. So we just hope the unusual conditions are fewer and farther between.
How many varieties of grapes do you grow in vineyards?
12.
12? Where are you pointing to Tom? 12 different grape varieties.
12, boom, all right. Next one, how is the Tawny Port going?
It's coming along. We're going to push it. John and I were just talking yesterday about pushing that tawny out, and it's getting closer to where we want it to be, but it's still not quite where we think it needs to be. So we're talking about pushing it out and give it 10 years, and really just double down on that. So it's there, it's getting there, but we think it still needs a little more time.
Yeah, to add on to that, we do have our 5, almost 6 year aged in bottle now that's available. When that runs out, I think we'll be up to over 6 years with the next bottling. We're going to start holding at least a barrel back from every vintage that we can get to at least 10 years. And we'll see. We would like it to get that true, deep, tawny character, and that's what we're aiming for. So we're going to continue to age these out longer, and look forward to that. Yeah.
Good. Can you explain the differences in your Cabernet Francs? Rapid fire.
Between white label and black label of Vineyard Select, yes. So Vineyard Select has a tendency to have a little bit more of the fruit forward Franc. It's fruit that comes in that's a little less age worthy. It's something that we try and get into bottle and highlight all of the nice characteristics it has without a whole lot of extended aging. That's typically 10 months, and then a good portion of that can be stainless. The white label Cab Franc is typically 10 to 12 months in barrel. It normally gets about 15% of French and American new oak, so a little less new oak. And then the black label is our wine that it's all French oak. That's getting between 14 and 16, sometimes 18 months in French oak barrels, and it usually gets about 25 to 30% new French oak.
Good, great. Would we consider doing a Norton Brut?
Norton Brut. Yes, I'll do anything sparkling at least one time.
Oh, you just committed yourself.
I'll try it.
Next is, do we have any immediate plans to expand the vineyard? And if so, what grapes would we be expanding with?
Well, good question. We don't have any plans to expand on our site here other than filling in a couple of small areas where we can extend some rows. So we would just be extending the same varieties that we're already growing. We have been looking loosely, this is not a this year project, but hopefully it's a next year project, to find another vineyard site between 10 and 20 acres that allows us to diversify again. If you get hit with a frost here, you'd like to not have all your eggs in one basket. We've got some diversity between this site and our sister vineyard in Shenandoah County, but we would like to have even a little more diversity. And as our needs grow, these two vineyards are going to be stressed, giving us the amount of fruit that we need. So that would be our next big investment, and I would say that that's at least 12 months, maybe 24 before we're able to pull the trigger on it, and then a planting exercise is another at least 3 years before you have fruit from it. So that would be 5, 6, 7 years down the road before we have a vineyard that is up and producing, but that would be our next volley.
Great. Would you ever consider making a Moscato?
Yes, I mean,
had it.
yeah, I mean, we did so our closest thing we have is we did that Muscat sparkling wine in 2018. There's 100% Muscat now, it's beautiful, and it's a little bit off dry, so it is not dissimilar to Moscato, although Moscato is typically a re-ferment, it's not a champagne, typically it's a re-fermentation in a tank rather than like a traditional champagne. We made our Muscat like a traditional champagne, so it's a little more, I would say it's got a little more finesse than what a typical Moscato would have. But yes, we're all about making very nice, approachable sparkling wines for sure.
This question is addressed to Theo. I'm not sure who wants to answer it though. With the up and down years, can you give folks an idea on what that translates to? Specifically in the question, in a case count, like Cab Franc, a down year versus an up year. Maybe tonnage as well would be relevant.
Quantities?
Yeah, like what does a down year versus an up year look like as far as yields, and can you translate that to cases that you would get from that?
So talk about, why doesn't Tom take this one and talk about like Cab Franc coming in at 4 tons to the acre versus 3, like Indian Springs coming in. Something that's coming in 4 tons to the acre, sometimes it's coming in at 5, 6.
Yeah, that's what happens. Some years it comes in at 4 tons an acre, sometimes it comes in at 5, sometimes it comes in at 2. I think this year it came in at like 6, So it goes back to what John was saying, referencing climate change, but really, nothing's changed because there is no norm. We never really know what to expect. So yields are generally all over the place. We do try to control those yields to a certain extent to create some normalcy not only in our production, but also in grape quality, because there's a finite amount of fruit that the vine can really fully ripen. So we do want to control yields to a certain extent. But when things happen like frosts or winter injury or hail or any number of other things that can affect the productivity of the vineyard, obviously those are going to be down years. So we've seen fruit, we've seen vineyards blocks that have produced as little as 1.5 tons to 2 tons an acre and as much as 6 tons an acre, depending on what happens within that specific season. Rarely do we get 6 tons an acre unless it's something like a hybrid. It's more common on our Indian Springs site. That's a very high yielding vineyard. Ours tends to be a little more consistent, but lower. And then, that translates directly into, what we can produce, at least from our own vineyards, because there's a fairly specific amount of cases that we can extract from a ton of grapes. It's 60 cases, right? So,
yeah, that's a good point. I mean, just for the big picture, our vineyard here, record harvest this year, 90 tons out of our vineyards here on site. That equates to a little over 5,000 cases of wine. 2 years ago, I think we harvested 40 tons here, which is half that, 2,500 cases of wine. In those down years, we will go out and source grapes from other growers in Virginia if we can get them. You can't always get them. We were very fortunate in 2017 to have a huge harvest and a really good year. We built a lot of inventory, took every grape in that we could, and then we had a down year in 2018, but it was okay because we had a lot of carryover from the previous vintage. 2019 was a nice sizable vintage, and 2020 again is a rather large vintage, our biggest ever, partly because everything produced more and partly because we needed to make more. Yeah, good question.
Really quickly, why can people have Ditto's tastings or cocktails outside? And if no, why not? Maybe because somebody needs to be pestered to build me a new distillery.
So if you heard that question, why can't you have Ditto's cocktails or tastings outside? So that's one of those silly legal situations with the state of Virginia. We have this one little room that is actually an ABC store. And that is the only place on our property where it is legal to consume that product. The minute you step out of the doors of that little tasting room, you are now on the license of Rappahannock Cellars, and you are now have a cocktail on a wine license premise. So totally illegal. Allan wants me to build a new distillery. Theo wants me to build a new distillery, get him out of the winery space, because the winery is, you can imagine these huge harvests. We're ready, and we're bursting at the seams. But one of the things that we may be able to do when the weather gets better is we're thinking about putting a kiosk of a sort out in the front. Maybe we have to put a little fence around it, but we can have an outdoor area where we could serve from, I don't know what you call it, a kiosk, a shed, something of that nature, that we could actually license and include as part of our ABC Ditto's license, and at least have a small area outdoors. Now, you couldn't go take that and walk up on the deck at Rappahannock Cellars, but you could maybe within that fenced area have a cocktail. So until Ditto's gets its own property or its own spaces, we're pretty limited in what we can do legally there.
Okay, real quickly, how does the closing of Desert Rose affect us, and do we have any plans for utilizing their grapes?
Okay, Desert Rose, how does that affect us with their closing? Well, we're sad. We're sad and we're happy. Bob and Linda, kind of sad to see them go, so to speak, although they're really not going anywhere. They're just closing their doors. But they did it by their plan. Bob turned 80 this year, 10 years in the business. They had a great time, and they're just had the biggest year ever in the history of their business this year. And but they're kind of going out on their own terms. Their grapes, no, we're not at this point picking up their grapes. I think Aspendale is farming their vineyard right now. So we don't have plans to take over that vineyard. It was logistically a little difficult for us, as silly as that may sound, with as much as we farm here. But yeah. 3 varietal questions. Pinot Grigio, Petit Manseng, and Chenin Blanc. For Chenin Blanc, obviously, we do. What's our plan for the Chenin Blanc in the future? Would we consider doing Pinot Grigio, and what are our thoughts on Petit Manseng?
Tom, you want to go?
I don't want to grow Pinot Grigio.
I don't really want to make Pinot Grigio.
It's a thin-skinned grape, tight clusters, very prone to rot. I mean, just about the time it starts to ripen up, it just falls apart. So it's a difficult grape to grow. It's one of those varieties as a grower, you just feel like you're beating your head against the wall with it. I know it makes a pretty approachable and desirable wine. So if they tell me that they want the wine, I guess I'll have to grow the grapes, but I just seem not to do that. Petit Manseng, I love Petit Manseng. It's fairly disease resistant. It's got a loose open cluster with small berries, so we don't have a lot of problems with rot. It's high sugars. It is also a high acid grape. I like the wines that come from it. Love to grow more Petit Manseng.
Got to keep it away from the birds.
Yeah. Well, it's just that.
Yeah.
Chenin Blanc, we've got some planted. We're going to see how that works. There's not a lot of people growing Chenin Blanc in Virginia, so don't know what it's going to do, but I think it's going to go into sparkling wine.
Yeah, that's these experiments take so much time. We planted Chenin Blanc 3 years ago.
Yeah.
We planned for it 4 years ago. We planted it 3 years ago. It'll be another year before we have grapes from it. It'll be 2 years before you see the wine from it, at least. Yeah. So you can see by the time we figure out, is this a grape we can grow in Virginia well? Does it make the wine we want it to make? It's a 7-8 year. It's just not a laboratory where we do experiments every hour on the hour, and it takes a long time. And you don't want to jump in too heavy. If there were other growers in Virginia growing it, that we could feel comfortable that they've been the pioneers already. You know, the old definition of pioneer is a guy with a lot of arrows in his tail. We'd like not to have the arrows, so if somebody else is invested in receiving those arrows and we can get comfortable with it, we would jump out there with more. But we've got an acre planted to it. Yeah, got 1 acre. It's
supposed to be high yielding.
Yeah, it's supposed to be high yielding. Maybe when it's fully mature, 5-6 tons a acre, something like that. So, you know, that's a reason that'll make 200 to 300 cases of wine. Not a bad little experiment. But by the time we figure it out and then decide if we want to plant more, and then we plant more, boy, those more aren't online for 10 years from now. So,
would you consider using the barn for dittos?
Would we consider using the barn for dittos? I love that little barn, but man, that thing is gravel sloping floor, undulating roof. We've looked at renovating it for dittos, and you always have to tear the darn thing down. So when we get to the point of moving dittos, it will be to a new building, I'm sure. When we build that building, we would like to build a new equipment barn, which would allow us to take our existing barn and turn it into an outdoor pavilion. That's the hope and dream. So,
we answered a question earlier about the difference between black label and white label. I think it was Cap Franc. This is a more general question about what's the difference between those two label programs.
So the two white label and black label programs.
I'm sorry. It's black label wines and Vintner Select.
Okay. So there's not a perfect exact answer to this. Generally speaking, our black label wines are what most wineries might call their reserve wines. These are wines that are kind of the best of the best. They've aged longer, they've been in the best barrels, they're the best fruit. And again, these would what I would call our reserve wines. The Vintner Select oftentimes is a different style. So Chardonnay is a classic example. We have our black label, which is a heavy barrel, long-aged Chardonnay. We have our white label, which is a medium-aged barrel Chardonnay. We use the VS label for our stainless steel only wine, so it's a different style. I think, I'm trying to think of where else we've used VS. It's usually when we have a style difference as opposed to a tiered difference, reserve versus non-reserve. Boy, our 2019 black label VS Vintner Select Chardonnay is absolutely stunning. And of course, that got both. That got a black label and a VS stamp. So we don't have a perfect answer to that, but that's how that works out.
Okay, we got a lot of really awesome comments and feedback, so thank you all for that. The last two bits here are, which child are you most proud of, and can we get a YMCA in here?
Get a YMCA in here? No. And I can neither confirm nor deny who my favorite child is, so sorry about that one.
All right, well.
Too many of them here and too many listening. Well, thank you, folks. I hope this filled a little bit of the void for not having soup events this year. For those of you who have been to our soup events, we know you miss them dearly. We do. For those of you who have not been to them, I can just tell you that when we finally start having them in person, it will be your first but not your last. And so I hope that we made up a little bit of the ground this year and that this filled a little bit of that void. And we really appreciate you hanging in there with us and participating today. And again, just from where we started, thank you. We really appreciate your friendship, your patronage, your involvement here. And can't say thank you too many times. So thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yep.